before humanity carved its first tablets of law or wrote its first lines of history. Ethiopia was already crafting a story of origins that shaped the world. Today, we're diving into a tale so ancient it feels almost forbidden, but you won't want to miss the revelation waiting at the end. Trust me, it's one that connects us all. If you're ready for a journey through time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. And hey, drop a comment below about your favorite ancient civilization, because your insight might just spark our next video. Long before towering cathedrals rose in Europe, and long before Rome's grand legions marched beneath the banner of a nascent faith, there was Ethiopia, ancient Kush, already steeped in stories that reached back to humanity's earliest days. The land known as Kush in biblical texts was not some distant, unnamed frontier. Instead, it stood at the crossroads of myth and history, woven into the genealogies of Genesis. Before the deserts advanced and before great empires faded to dust, there were lush valleys and thriving communities along fertile waterways. These lands were nurtured by mighty rivers that seemed to whisper old secrets, connecting distant peoples and kingdoms. Ethiopia's lineage flowed down from Noah's son Ham through Cush, carving an identity that stretched beyond fable. It was not a mere footnote in scripture, but an essential branch of the human story, one that traced its origins to the days when the world was young and newly replenished after the deluge. In these earliest generations, Ethiopia's people watched constellations swirl overhead and kindled sacred fires that burned through the dark nights. They listened to ancestral tales of Nimrod, the mighty hunter, who rose from Kushite lineage to found great cities whose names would echo through time. Even then, Ethiopia was no distant spectator. It was intricately connected to the heartbeats of civilizations that would shape language, trade, and worship here in these highlands and low valleys. Long before stone tablets bore the weight of law and revelation, Ethiopia's story stirred. Its destiny was not yet clear, but its place in the divine tapestry of faith and prophecy had already begun to form, waiting patiently to emerge in the grand narrative of salvation and nationhood. As centuries passed, Ethiopia's lineage took shape under the watchful eyes of ancestors and the steady flow of rivers. When the names of cities like Babel and Akkad emerged in distant lands, connected to that legendary figure Nimrod, himself sprung from the Kushite line, Ethiopia was already forging its identity. While Nimrod built monumental cities on the plains of Shinar, in Ethiopia's fertile regions, people cultivated robust communities defined by intricate kinship bonds and enduring faith in unseen powers. Caravans occasionally drifted through, carrying rare goods and hushed rumors, linking Ethiopia to the early centers of human enterprise. Along trade routes, whispers told of towering ziggurats and ambitious kings who sought to etch their marks upon the heavens. Though these stories traveled far, Ethiopia kept its own counsel. Its people did not hasten to mimic foreign splendor or adopt distant gods. Instead, they nurtured what was theirs, a subtle, persistent devotion rooted in the rhythms of sun and season, river and plain. In the distant north, rulers rose and fell, their names recorded on clay tablets and temple walls. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's identity solidified through practice rather than proclamation. They understood that might could manifest not just in conquest but in cultural resilience. They harbored within them the quiet certainty that their lineage had begun at the dawn of time. Even as great empires wrestled for dominance, Ethiopia's lands remained a cradle of continuity, where clan chiefs consulted elders beneath ancient trees and songs of the ancestors were sung into the dusky sky. Empires elsewhere strived for immortality through conquest, but Ethiopia found eternity in faith. In the stories passed from one generation to another, like seeds planted deep in fertile soil awaiting the proper season to flower, Ethiopia's reach into scriptural narrative would soon extend beyond genealogies. From across the Red Sea, news of a wise king in Jerusalem drifted southward, carried by those who braved deserts and waterways. This king was Solomon, famed for his unearthly understanding, and his wisdom fascinated the world. The Queen of Sheba, a regal figure whose domain included Ethiopia and parts of the southern Arabian Peninsula, resolved to meet this king face to face. She set forth on a caravan shimmering with gold and incense, bold in her quest to measure the truth of Solomon's renown. The journey took her through landscapes both harsh and beautiful, scorching desert sands, mountainous passes, and fertile valleys that reminded her of home. With each step, her curiosity grew. She carried questions, riddles, and treasures to test Solomon's brilliance. Yet what she would find in Jerusalem exceeded all rumor and repute. Before Solomon's throne, the Queen of Sheba beheld splendor and heard answers that unraveled her most challenging enigmas. Tales say she offered lavish gifts, but also that she carried away something far more precious, a seed of destiny that would link Ethiopia's future to Israel's ancient lineage. In these moments, as the queen and the king exchanged wisdom and understanding, a thread of spiritual inheritance was spun. Later traditions, especially the Kabra Nagast, would preserve a startling claim that the Queen of Sheba bore Solomon a son, Menelik, who would one day return to Ethiopia carrying the Ark of the Covenant itself. Whether one views these accounts as literal truth or symbolic narrative, their resonance shaped Ethiopia's identity. Through this fabled encounter, Ethiopia did not merely become a footnote in biblical history, it became intimately woven into Israel's sacred tapestry, forging a bond that would define centuries of faith. Menelik, born from the union of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, inherited both royal lineages and spiritual legacies. According to Ethiopian tradition, when he came of age, he journeyed to Jerusalem to meet his father. Though welcomed graciously, Menelik sensed a calling beyond mere diplomacy. In a secret departure from the holy city, it is said he carried with him the Ark of the Covenant, God's sacred chest that once guided Israel through deserts and over Jordan's threshold. Within Ethiopian lore, this daring act was not theft but destiny. God allowed the Ark to find refuge in a new land, ensuring that the divine presence could dwell not only in Israel but also beyond its borders. Upon returning to Ethiopia, Menelik became the first in a line of Solomonic kings who claimed descent from David and Solomon, rooting Ethiopia's monarchy in sacred history. The Arkansas, guarded by devoted priests, found a home in Aksum, where it would remain hidden from prying eyes. The Ark's presence in Ethiopia served not merely as a relic, but as a living symbol of covenant and continuity. Its guardians became keepers of a profound mystery. Ethiopia could now claim a unique closeness to the God of Israel, an intimacy that transcended distant genealogies and embraced tangible, divine artifact. This inheritance helped shape Ethiopia's spiritual self-image as a chosen land, tasked with preserving a hidden glory. In time, even as Israel faced trials, exile, and reunion, Ethiopia carried on this quiet custodianship. Through Menelik's lineage, a Solomonic dynasty reigned for millennia, weaving ancestral faith into governance and culture. It offered the world a striking image, an African kingdom nurturing the flames of a faith kindled in the Near East, sustaining a legacy far beyond the horizons of its birth. Over centuries, Ethiopia's Solomonic line endured, lending structure and continuity to its society. Kings and queens ascended the throne, each anchored in the ancient claim of Davidic descent. While powers shifted elsewhere, empires rose and fell in Mesopotamia. The Mediterranean world shaped and reformed, and dynasties in Egypt waned. Ethiopia's monarchy stood as a living link to biblical antiquity. This lineage did more than legitimize political authority. It forged a spiritual identity that offered Ethiopians a profound sense of purpose. The monarchy was not merely secular, it reflected a covenant, a sacred charge inherited from Solomon and Menelik. The rulers guarded not only their people's welfare, but also a luminous heritage that connected them to Israel's divine narrative. Over time, this storied lineage guided Ethiopia through transformations that reshaped its horizon. As the ancient kingdom of DMT gave way to Aksum, Ethiopia's heart shifted to a rising civilization known for its monumental obelisks and vibrant trade routes. Merchants traveled from the Roman Empire and India, finding in Aksum a tolerant, powerful kingdom open to commerce and ideas. Yet, no matter how far trade networks extended, or how many foreign coins clinked in bustling markets, Ethiopia's monarchy reminded the land of its unique spiritual duty. The crown's legitimacy rested not merely on force of arms, but on the holy legacy it bore. This inheritance instilled a quiet confidence that Ethiopia stood apart, commissioned by a higher calling to safeguard faith and tradition. While distant wars raged and alliances formed and crumbled, Ethiopia remained anchored in something eternal. Here, in the highlands washed by warm rains and lit by early dawns, a royal line maintained continuity with biblical kings, ensuring that the memory of covenant and chosenness did not fade, even as the world stage took on new actors and scripts. Before the Roman Empire would finally yield to Christian faith, Ethiopia quietly embraced the new creed, while Roman emperors still hunted believers in catacombs, and martyrs' names were whispered through the empire's crowded squares. Ethiopia began its journey as a Christian nation. The seeds of the gospel took root early here, nurtured in soils already prepared by centuries of reverence and prophetic expectation. This remarkable transformation began humbly. There were merchants who traveled through the Red Sea ports, carrying not only spices and textiles, but also the stories of Jesus and his apostles. There were seekers who journeyed to Alexandria or the Holy Land, returning with sacred scrolls and heartfelt conviction. And, most pivotal of all, was the moment when the missionary Frumentius, once a captive boy, rose to become a teacher and advisor to King Ezana of Aksum. Under Ezana's rule in the 4th century AD, Ethiopia officially embraced Christianity, making it one of the first nations anywhere to do so. This happened even before Emperor Constantine declared Christianity the faith of Rome. Ethiopia did not need imperial endorsement to recognize the truth shining in the teachings of Christ. This early adoption of Christianity was not superficial. The faith sank deep into the Ethiopian psyche, merging with local customs and languages, forging a distinctly Ethiopian Christianity. It brought a new dimension to the nation's ancient sense of chosenness. Now, as a Christian kingdom, Ethiopia stood apart from many neighbors, a beacon of faith on the African plateau. In monasteries perched atop mountain peaks, monks chanted old hymns in Guizi, and scribes patiently copied biblical texts, illuminating the pages with colors born from earth and petals. Ethiopia's Christian dawn had arrived, blending ancestral legacy with the unifying promise of the gospel. Christianity in Ethiopia did not merely duplicate foreign traditions. Here, the faith took on a unique form, shaped by local languages, liturgical chants, and sacred art. Guizi, once the tongue of empire, became the language of scripture and liturgy. Skilled scribes turned animal skins into illuminated manuscripts, each page bearing intricate motifs of vines, crosses, and angelic figures. Ethiopian orthodoxy, as it crystallized, celebrated festivals and fasts with fervor. The faithful observed ancient rites, singing hymns passed down through centuries, blending biblical echoes with a distinctly Ethiopian aesthetic. The rock-hewn churches of Lalibela emerged as a testament to unwavering devotion, chapels carved from living stone, forming a sacred Jerusalem in Africa where pilgrims would pray for ages to come. The Ethiopian church developed a monastic tradition with deep mystical roots. Monks retreated into remote mountains and deserts, seeking communion with God in silence broken only by wind and prayer. Their influence shaped education, social welfare, and agricultural practices, anchoring communities in compassion and faith. Over time, this orthodox tradition served as the soul of the nation, providing continuity and resilience. At a time when the Roman Church and Eastern Orthodoxy grappled with theological schisms, Ethiopian Christianity stood firm in its heritage. It neither broke away nor wavered, maintaining a distinct faith identity that respected early Christian doctrines while integrating local genius. Ethiopian icons portrayed biblical scenes with dark-skinned saints and angels, reflecting the people's visage and reinforcing their belief that they too were beloved of God. The church fostered unity across Ethiopia's diverse ethnic mosaic. Under the shelter of its wings, various tribes and regions found common ground in Christ's teachings. As centuries rolled on, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's memory, written on scrolls and sung in hymns, fortified the nation's spirit and preserved its sacred narrative. as Islam rose in Arabia and spread swiftly across North Africa and the Middle East. Ethiopia remained anchored in its Christian roots. Neighboring regions embraced the new faith, and Islam established great centers of learning and commerce from Cairo to Timbuktu. Yet Ethiopia, though sometimes surrounded by religious and political turbulence, maintained its Christian character. This distinctiveness was neither accident nor isolationist zeal. Ethiopia engaged with Muslim merchants and diplomats, treaties were signed, and courtesies exchanged. Ethiopian merchants sailed on the Red Sea, trading with Islamic ports, while Sufi saints passed through, occasionally bringing stories and knowledge. Yet the Ethiopian heart remained steadfast, even when certain Islamic sultanates took shape along its borders. The highlands preserved their ancient liturgical chants and incense-filled churches, spared from colonization's early waves and the Arab conquests that redrew many maps. Ethiopia negotiated its sovereignty through diplomatic prowess and strategic alliances. Its leaders, bolstered by faith, navigated tumultuous geopolitical currents. The Ark of the Covenant remained hidden away, spiritual guardians ever vigilant, as if a divine hand shielded them through these storms. By the medieval period, Europe vaguely understood Ethiopia as a distant Christian realm, sometimes imaginatively referred to as the kingdom of the legendary Prester John. While Europeans crusade and established new trade routes, they looked to Ethiopia as a curious ally against the Islamic empires. This fascination hinted that Ethiopia's existence provided a counter-narrative, an African Christian kingdom thriving independently beyond Europe's grasp. Thus, Ethiopia's faith became both shield and beacon. As faiths collided and civilizations jostled for position, Ethiopia radiated the message that devotion, adaptability, and respect for tradition could preserve a nation's soul. In a world reshaped by conquests, Ethiopia's Christian anchor moored it securely, ensuring its narrative continued undimmed, distinct, and resolute. As the age of exploration dawned, European powers ventured forth, their ships bridging oceans and discovering new lands. They planted flags, claimed territories, and seized wealth. Across Africa, colonial ambitions drew stark lines on maps. Most kingdoms, fractured by internal strife or lured by trade pacts, fell under European sway. But Ethiopia, guarded by mountainous terrain and tempered by centuries of resilience, stood firm. The proud emperors of Ethiopia, successors to a lineage that traced back millennia, regarded Europe's advances with caution. They were open to exchange. Diplomatic missions and emissaries were received in royal courts. European explorers marveled at Ethiopia's ancient churches, its relics, and monasteries older than some European cathedrals. Yet beneath the surface courtesies, Ethiopia held tightly to its sovereignty. When Italy, inspired by imperial ambitions, tried to extend its grip into Ethiopian territories, it underestimated the resolve born of faith and history. At the Battle of Adwa in 1896, Ethiopian warriors, guided by Emperor Menelik II, turned back Italian forces in a resounding triumph. This victory shocked Europe. It proved that Ethiopia was not a disorganized frontier ripe for plunder, but a nation anchored in centuries-old confidence. Many Ethiopians saw in this triumph the hand of God, protecting a land that had carried the covenant and upheld the cross for so long. Adwa became a symbol of African dignity. While much of the continent lay under foreign rule, Ethiopia stood apart, an ancient Christian empire showing that colonization was not inevitable. This victory echoed a deeper truth. Ethiopia's resilience did not spring merely from martial prowess, but from a bedrock of spiritual identity. A people who knew their story stretched back to Genesis, who believed divine providence shaped their path, would not bow easily to alien crowns. Their hills and valleys rang with hymns of gratitude and pride. In the wake of Adwa, Ethiopia's reputation soared among colonized peoples. It proved that African nations could stand tall against European arms. Yet, Ethiopia's resistance was not a simple tale of military might. Its strength lay in an identity forged over centuries, a tapestry woven from biblical ancestry, Christian faith, and cultural autonomy. Still, Ethiopia's pride came at a cost. As the world modernized, The country struggled to fully industrialize or adopt the work habits and organizational structures that propelled Western economies forward. The very traditions that preserved Ethiopia's uniqueness sometimes hindered rapid change. While machines hummed in European factories, Ethiopia's plowmen still turned earth with ancient tools. Yet, many Ethiopians considered this a fair trade. Material poverty weighed less heavily on their souls than would spiritual destitution. They believed the treasures of the spirit outweighed temporal wealth. Strong faith, expressed in church gatherings, festivals, and community rites, held the people together when wealth was scarce. This balance between faith and worldly progress shaped Ethiopia's destiny. Its struggles with modernization did not erode the foundations of belief. Instead, they underscored the difference between a hurried chase for material gain and a patient cultivation of eternal values. Even as trains and telegraphs became common elsewhere, Ethiopia clung to a time-honored rhythm of life guided by prayer, fasting, and communal bond. In a world obsessed with power and possessions, Ethiopia's choice was radical. It remained a custodian of something intangible, a legacy entrusted to it by millennia of prophecy, lineage, and devotion. While the world danced to industrial tunes, Ethiopia hummed ancient psalms. The tension between these realities would persist, revealing itself in the decades ahead, as Ethiopia navigated both the pride of independence and the challenges of catching up to a rapidly evolving global landscape. Haile Selassie rose to the throne as Emperor of Ethiopia in the early 20th century. Descended from the Solomonic line, he embodied centuries of legacy. To many, he seemed a living symbol of Ethiopia's biblical heritage, a custodian of the Ark's secretive whispers. Under his guidance, Ethiopia sought to navigate a modern world while preserving its spiritual core. Yet, when fascist Italy under Mussolini invaded in 1935, Ethiopia faced a grave challenge. The invaders came with modern arms and poison gas, seeking to avenge Adwa and secure colonial prestige. Despite Ethiopia's valiant resistance, the country was temporarily overrun. Haile Selassie fled to England, addressing the League of Nations and begging the world's Christian countries to uphold justice. For 5 years, Italy occupied Ethiopia. Churches were desecrated, traditions suppressed, but the Ethiopian spirit did not break. Resistance movements persisted in remote highlands. Clandestine prayers rose in secret sanctuaries. Ethiopians believed that God's hand, which had protected them before, would restore their independence. With the outbreak of World War II and the eventual victory of the Allies, Haile Selassie returned triumphantly in 1941. Ethiopia's sovereignty was restored. Many saw this as another affirmation of the nation's spiritual destiny. No foreign empire could permanently subjugate a land whose roots lay in divine covenant. This chapter left scars and lessons. It confirmed Ethiopia's resilience, but also revealed the fragility of old ways in a world of tanks and bombs. The emperor recognized the need for reforms, education, and infrastructure to safeguard Ethiopia's future. Yet he also understood that modernization could not come at the expense of the ancient faith that defined the Ethiopian soul. Thus, the nation prepared to walk a delicate path, balancing old and new, sacred and secular, strength and humility. Ethiopia's role in scripture and prophecy stretched beyond the echoes of ancient kingdoms and heroic battles. This land, shaped by its rivers, also contributed to the tapestry of biblical geography. The Blue Nile, rising in the Ethiopian highlands, joined the White Nile further north, eventually forming the mighty Nile that nourished Egypt. In the Bible, the Nile often symbolized life and power. During the Exodus, it turned to blood, manifesting God's judgment on Egypt. Ethiopia's highlands, quietly feeding those waters, stood apart, elevated and independent. Just as God once demonstrated his sovereignty over Pharaoh, so too Ethiopia's narrative suggested a divine orchestration at work behind histories and geographies. Modern Ethiopia's relationship with the Nile continues to hold global significance. The construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, on the Blue Nile has stirred international debates. Egypt fears disruptions to its water supply, while Ethiopia asserts its right to harness the river for development. Old stories resurface in new forms. As nations negotiate water rights with diplomatic caution, this interplay between ancient symbol and modern conflict resonates deeply. For centuries, Ethiopia's spiritual inheritance shaped its diplomacy and character. Now, pragmatic concerns demand engineering acumen and political negotiation. Yet, the same spirit that resisted colonization, protected the Arkansas, and upheld Christian faith through invasions may guide Ethiopia through these contemporary challenges. Ethiopia's role in sustaining the Nile, literal lifeblood for millions, reflects how entwined human destinies are with their environment. Biblical echoes remain. The same river that once served as a backdrop to divine intervention now flows through disputes and dreams of prosperity. In these waters, Ethiopia's ancient legacy converses with its future, reminding the world that prophecy and geography, faith and politics, remain eternally linked. Ethiopia's connection to the New Testament emerges vividly in the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, found in the book of Acts, chapter 8. This court official served the Candace, or Queen of Ethiopia, and had journeyed to Jerusalem to worship. On his return, he pondered the prophet Isaiah's words without understanding. Then the evangelist Philip appeared, explaining the scriptures and revealing Jesus as the prophesied Messiah. Moved by the truth, the eunuch requested baptism. There, by the roadside, he embraced the faith, becoming an early African convert, long before Christianity spread widely. This moment suggests divine intention, highlighting Ethiopia's early inclusion in the story of salvation. The eunuch represents the reach of the gospel beyond the frontiers of Judea, God's promise extending to distant lands. For Ethiopia, this account is precious. It testifies that the seeds of the gospel reached her soil independently, not merely as a colonial import centuries later. The eunuch's encounter with Philip anchors Ethiopia in apostolic times. While Rome grappled with Caesar's decrees, Ethiopia already nurtured the word. Some see in this narrative an echo of Zephaniah's prophecy, which speaks of worshippers coming from beyond the rivers of Cush. The eunuch's spiritual awakening anticipates the broader Christianization of Ethiopia centuries later. It also underscores Ethiopia's special relationship with Scripture, not as a distant audience but as active participants in the unfolding story. Today, Ethiopian Christians still cherish this early connection. It shapes their identity, affirming that their faith journey is neither borrowed nor imposed, but arises naturally from biblical witness. This apostolic link, emerging even before official conversions, grants Ethiopia a profound spiritual confidence. It reminds believers worldwide that the good news transcends boundaries, finding a home in every corner of the earth, even those prophesied in ancient times. As biblical prophecies sweep across centuries, they occasionally cast their gaze upon distant lands. Ethiopia, known as Cush, appears in visions of end times and alliances in texts like Ezekiel and Zephaniah. In Ezekiel 38, verse 5, Cush is counted among allies gathering against Israel in a grand, mysterious conflict. This foretelling places Ethiopia in a tapestry of nations drawn into cosmic drama. These passages, layered with metaphor and symbolism, invite ponderous interpretation. For some, Ethiopia's mention in end-time scenarios emphasizes its significance throughout salvation history. A land once favored, once home to the Arkansas, once a cradle for early Christianity, cannot remain absent when the final chapters unfold. Others read these prophecies more figuratively, as a reminder that the whole world, Ethiopia included, participates in the ultimate reckoning. In modern Ethiopia, discussions of such prophecies mingle with ancient prayers and present-day challenges. The faithful do not fear these texts, but regard them with humility and trust. For if Ethiopia's past was guided by divine purpose, then its future, too, rests in God's hands. No matter how tumultuous the times, this prophetic heritage keeps Ethiopia mindful of its spiritual journey. The same land that once sheltered the Arkansas that hosted the world's earliest converts, that claimed descent from biblical kings, may yet find itself part of unfolding eschatological mysteries, whether literal or symbolic. The mention of Ethiopia in end-time prophecies underscores that God's plan includes all nations. In an increasingly interconnected world, Ethiopia's role in global faith conversations expands. Scholars, theologians, and pilgrims turn their eyes again to this ancient highland nation. As the winds of change blow, Ethiopia stands as a quiet sentinel, its people faithfully maintaining their liturgies and fasting seasons, waiting and watching, confident that their lineage and legacy still matter in God's grand design. Pause for a moment. Did you know that Ethiopia is believed to be the home of the Ark of the Covenant? Whether it's fact or legend, the story of its guardianship might reveal something incredible about human devotion. What do you think, fact or fable? Let me know your take in the comments below, and let's keep the debate alive. As the modern era advanced, Ethiopia's narrative grew more complex. Haile Selassie's reign brought attempts at modernization, schools were founded, roads built, and a constitution introduced. Ethiopia joined the League of Nations, then the United Nations, contributing to global dialogue. Still, old faith and traditions persisted. The emperor himself was seen by some as a messiah figure, notably in the Rastafarian movement that arose in Jamaica, venerating Ethiopia as Zion. Rastafarians viewed Haile Selassie as divine, a living embodiment of prophecy, and Ethiopia as the Promised Land, though the emperor did not encourage this interpretation and remained a devout Christian. The movement's existence highlighted Ethiopia's magnetic, spiritual allure beyond its borders. The image of a black king descending from David's line, ruling an independent African Christian kingdom, inspired far-flung dreams. Within Ethiopia, Christianity remained the cornerstone of cultural life. Yet political pressures mounted. The mid-20th century brought famine, unrest, and the emperor's eventual overthrow in 1974. A Marxist regime took power, repressing religious institutions and plunging Ethiopia into turmoil. The Ark and the Church's treasured manuscripts remained guarded, yet a shadow fell upon the land. Even during these dark years, faith quietly endured. Secret prayers rose in hidden sanctuaries, and monks preserved sacred texts in remote monasteries. The old prophecies and genealogies still lived in collective memory. Decades of conflict and hardship would follow before Ethiopia could step into a new era. Ethiopia's story proves that faith does not guarantee an easy path. The nation that once defied colonizers now grappled with internal strife and ideological oppression. Yet in these struggles, Ethiopians discovered resilience, as their spiritual heritage gave them strength to persist. The legacy of ancient covenants and early conversions offered a steady compass, guiding them through political storms and generational upheavals. With the end of the Marxist Derg regime in the late 20th century, Ethiopia began to reassert its faith and cultural identity openly. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, suppressed and marginalized, emerged from shadows to renew its ancient mission. Priests and monks who had quietly maintained liturgies in secret now welcomed worshippers into sunlit churches. Ethiopia's Christian heritage drew renewed scholarly interest. Tourists ventured to Aksum, where the Ark's guardians still claimed to watch over the sacred relic. Scholars studied the Guizi manuscripts that preserved theological debates and mystical prayers from distant centuries. In Lalibela, pilgrims walked barefoot into subterranean rock churches, marveling at a spiritual architecture older than some European countries. National pride and religious devotion walked hand in hand. The church's liturgical calendar infused the rhythm of life with fasting periods, feast days, and extravagant festivals like Timkat, celebrating the baptism of Christ. These practices preserved unity and offered spiritual nourishment, reminding Ethiopians that modern struggles did not erase ancient blessings. As neighboring countries faced sectarian strife, Ethiopia's religious community often served as a stabilizing influence. Interfaith dialogues took place, fostering respect and coexistence. Ancient monastic traditions encouraged contemplation and altruism, inspiring community initiatives for education and healthcare. Through these renewed freedoms and spiritual restorations, Ethiopia discovered that its old identity, the legacy of Solomon and Sheba, the Arkansas the early Christians, remained deeply relevant. In a digital age, when global connectivity sometimes undermines tradition, Ethiopia embraced its uniqueness. It reminded the world that technological progress need not erase faith treasures. and that a nation's spiritual narrative can endure alongside modern aspirations. Ethiopia, once again, stood at a crossroads, confident enough in its heritage to guide its future steps under the watchful gaze of its ancient mountains and silent stars. One of Ethiopia's enduring wonders is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's claim to house the Ark of the Covenant in Aksum's Chapel of the Tablet, although outsiders are forbidden to view it. The presence of a dedicated guardian monk, chosen to spend his life protecting the Arkansas, fuels curiosity and reverence. For millennia, rumors, testimonies, and pilgrim stories have sustained this mystery. If the Ark truly resides there, its significance is immeasurable. The object that accompanied the Israelites through the wilderness, that dwelled in Solomon's temple, would have found a resting place in an African kingdom, fulfilling ancient prophecies of faith spreading to distant lands. Even if some doubt the Ark's authenticity, its symbolic power is undeniable. To Ethiopians, it doesn't matter if the world believes. The Ark's spiritual presence reinforces their sense of chosenness. It aligns Ethiopia with the great narratives of Exodus and Kings, bridging a gap between Old Testament covenant and African custodianship. The Ark's invisible aura influences pilgrimages and theology. Monks chant psalms before dawn, believing they echo sounds once heard in Solomon's courts. The Ark's guardianship also underscores Ethiopia's idea of stewardship. For centuries, it has preserved not just religious artifacts but entire traditions, liturgical music, manuscripts, fasting disciplines, and ancient tongues. Ethiopia's role as protector resonates with its identity as a nation entrusted with precious truths. Modern Ethiopians debate how to engage the world with this tradition. Should they open the chapel's doors and offer proof? Or should mystery remain, strengthening devotion and protecting sacred trust? For now, the Ark remains unseen, a powerful metaphor of faith unseen but felt. It binds Ethiopia's past to its present, affirming that this land, tucked among highlands and valleys, plays a role in God's story too grand for human eyes alone. Deep in the Ethiopian highlands lie monasteries perched on cliff tops, accessible only by rope or treacherous footpaths. Within their stone cells, monks preserve ancient manuscripts that narrate heroic saints, doctrinal councils, and local legends. Some texts detail early dialogues between Christians and Jews. Others chronicle miracles attributed to the Ark's presence. In these libraries, Ethiopian Christianity's intellectual wealth remains safeguarded. While Europe's medieval scriptoriums often focused on Latin texts, Ethiopia championed Guizi, creating a literary tradition uniquely African and Christian. The manuscripts illuminate a worldview where scripture, liturgy, and local folklore intertwine. Researchers arriving from abroad marvel at these repositories. They find texts once thought lost, commentaries that reveal how Ethiopians interpreted biblical passages centuries ago. Each discovery proves Ethiopia's long-standing engagement with theology, demonstrating that Christian tradition here is not a passive inheritance but a living conversation. Some monasteries hold manuscripts believed to predate even the arrival of Frumentius, possibly tracing Christian thought in Ethiopia to apostolic times. Others preserve records of royal decrees establishing churches, testifying to the enduring alliance between throne and altar. Such documents highlight how, for centuries, temporal and spiritual authorities worked hand in hand to shape Ethiopian identity. In these hidden monasteries, the sacred and the scholarly dwell side by side. The musty scent of old parchment mingles with incense. Flickering candlelight illuminates gold-painted miniatures of saints and angels who have watched over these texts for countless generations. Here, the faithful and curious alike learn that Ethiopia's Christian legacy is no mere footnote. Instead, it is a robust, living tradition, tended by custodians who value prayer and learning as inseparable virtues. As the modern world rushes forward, these secluded outposts of faith and knowledge remain resolute anchors, reminding humanity that true wisdom often resides off well-trodden paths. Ethiopia's story intersects not only with past and present, but also with the future. Eschatological prophecies place it among nations that will appear at the world's consummation. Such visions can stir apprehension, but many Ethiopians see them as affirmations that God's purposes encompass their land. In times of uncertainty, when climatic shifts cause droughts, or political tensions strain unity, believers turn to these prophecies for solace. They recall that Ethiopia's faith survived invasions, ideological regimes, and famine. The God who sustained them then will guide them now, and into whatever future unfolds. Debates arise about how literally to interpret end-time scriptures. Some anticipate Ethiopia's role as symbolic, representing Africa's spiritual inheritance. Others imagine actual alliances and conflicts in a future global stage. The Church, generally cautious, encourages trust in divine wisdom rather than speculative fear. As global Christianity shifts southward, with Africa becoming a demographic heartland of the faith, Ethiopia's example grows more influential. Millions of believers worldwide admire its resilience. They find hope in its ancient testimonies and stability in its unbroken Orthodox tradition. In this sense, Ethiopia's role in end times may already be partly fulfilled, standing as a witness that the gospel endures through trials and centuries. If prophecy instructs the faithful to watch and pray, Ethiopia provides a model of patient vigilance. It neither rushes to fulfill prophecies nor denies them. It stands rooted in prayer, liturgy, and trust. Just as the eunuch once asked Philip to explain Isaiah, Ethiopia continues asking God to clarify his plans. The nation's presence in apocalyptic visions signals that the Old Covenant's blessings and responsibilities never faded. They transformed, echoing through deserts and highlands, reminding all that God's story is larger than any single epoch or empire. In contemporary Ethiopia, modernity and tradition coexist in a delicate dance. The capital city, Addis Ababa, teems with cars, skyscrapers, and internet cafes. Yet, on holidays, the streets fill with processions of believers clad in white, carrying crosses and chanting hymns older than memory. One can read global news online, then step into a centuries-old church where the liturgy unfolds as it did for generations. Ethiopia wrestles with challenges common to developing nations: rural poverty, infrastructure gaps, and economic disparities. But amid these trials, faith provides a core identity. The people's Christian devotion, refined by history, offers comfort and moral guidance. Festivals like Meskel, the finding of the true cross, draw thousands to burning torches and joyful dances, reflecting communal solidarity. Timkat, Epiphany, reenacts Christ's baptism with waters sprinkled on the faithful, reconnecting each believer to the scripture and reminding them that the spiritual legacy of their ancestors remains alive. Ethiopia's Catholic and Protestant communities also grow, adding new dimensions to the Christian mosaic. Interfaith dialogues with Muslim neighbors foster mutual respect. The country's religious plurality, though tense at times, generally coexists with a shared sense of Ethiopianness. Faith traditions serve as both anchors and bridges. Local artisans craft crosses inspired by ancient designs, merging past and present. Musicians experiment with traditional church chants, blending them with contemporary styles. The youth navigate between global pop culture and the homilies of wise priests. Through these interactions, Ethiopia modernizes without losing the essence of its heritage. The present moment reveals that Ethiopia's faith story is not static relic. It evolves, responding to changing times. Just as it once absorbed the gospel independently, now it adapts digital tools, spreads its message online, and welcomes pilgrims from abroad. Ethiopia stands firm yet flexible, confident that its foundation remains unshaken. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, has emerged as a modern emblem of Ethiopia's aspirations. Built on the Blue Nile, it promises electricity, irrigation, and economic empowerment. Yet its construction ignites tensions with Egypt, fearful that water flow might diminish. These negotiations echo ancient struggles over the river's lifeblood. Diplomats meet, scientists measure water levels, and experts debate treaties. Ethiopians see the GERD as a rightful development, a way to lift their people from poverty without forsaking their identity. To them, controlling the Nile's power is a step toward fulfilling a long-deferred promise of self-sufficiency. Egypt's anxiety reflects its historical reliance on the Nile. Both nations have valid claims, and the world watches as they attempt diplomatic solutions. Behind the technical details, a deeper narrative unfolds, a story that began in biblical times. When rivers define life and boundaries, Ethiopia's faithful pray for peace and justice. They recall how their land once nurtured spiritual resilience in the face of adversity. Now, challenged not by armies, but by legal documents and hydroelectric turbines, Ethiopia's moral compass guides its negotiations. The Ark's legacy, the memory of kings and monks, and the unwavering devotion to Christian ethics all inform how Ethiopians approach these controversies. While no prophecy explicitly speaks of dams, this situation resonates with the themes that have always surrounded Ethiopia: independence, responsibility, and destiny. The GERD may shape Ethiopia's economic future, but it also tests its capacity to exemplify faith-driven stewardship. In forging a just compromise, Ethiopia honors its past as a guardian of covenantal treasures and ensures its legacy continues to inspire future generations. For as rivers flowed through ancient scriptures, so now they flow through modern diplomacy, carrying forward the old and new stories entwined in Ethiopia's heart. Lalabella's rock-hewn churches stand as a testament to Ethiopia's spiritual and artistic genius. Carved directly from volcanic rock, these medieval structures form a complex symbolic landscape. They replicate the Holy Land's sacred geography, allowing Ethiopian pilgrims who could not journey to Jerusalem a chance to experience the divine narrative at home. In these subterranean churches, monks and priests conduct liturgies in Guiz, surrounded by carved crosses and biblical murals. Timeless chants fill cool, stony chambers. Pilgrims drop to their knees, their voices echoing through corridors of stone. Every chisel mark records faith's encounter with Earth's substance. Medieval artisans worked in teams inspired by visions, prayer, and royal patronage. The legend states King Lalibela received divine instruction to build these churches in the 12th to 13th centuries. Completed with extraordinary skill, they remain architectural wonders. Visitors now descend narrow passages to discover hidden courtyards and carved pillars that defy explanation. For Ethiopians, Lalibela is both a national treasure and a spiritual stronghold. It proves that faith can shape landscapes, transforming rock into a sacred script. In this silent stone language, the Gospels are told without words. Just as Ethiopia's legacy is etched into global Christianity, so here faith is etched into the earth itself. These churches attract global tourists and pilgrims, who marvel at the ingenuity and devotion required to carve these sanctuaries. Yet Lalibela is no museum piece. Ceremonies still unfold daily, connecting present worshippers with their ancestors who first prayed in these hollowed stones centuries ago. Amid the world's rapid changes, Lalibela's churches remind everyone that faith needs no modern stage to shine. Even the hardest stone can be shaped by devotion. Here, Ethiopia's soul sings through silent rock, proving that its ancient bond with the divine is woven into the very ground beneath its feet. Among Ethiopia's most vivid traditions is Timkat, the Ethiopian Orthodox celebration of Epiphany, marking Christ's baptism in the Jordan. It brings entire communities together in joyful procession. Priests carry tablets, revered replicas of the Ark, beneath embroidered umbrellas. Congregations sing and dance, showered with holy water as they symbolically renew their own baptismal vows. During Timkat, the spiritual and communal converge. White-robed crowds fill streets, chanting hymns that echo through alleys and courtyards. Candles flicker against the dawn sky as worshippers gather around pools or rivers. Priests recite ancient prayers, smoke of incense rising like a bridge between heaven and earth. For Ethiopians, Timkat is not a mere festival, it's a living enactment of biblical events. Just as the eunuch was baptized centuries ago, now multitudes immerse themselves in this sacramental memory. Through water, they rejoin the flow of a faith older than nations, aligning their lives with stories that began in Eden and echoed through Israel and across oceans. Visitors marvel at Timkat's vitality. Cameras capture shimmering processions, but photographs cannot fully convey the spiritual weight carried in those melodies. Timkat's essence lies in the interior transformation, believers renewing faith, recommitting to a covenant sealed long ago. It's a shared testimony that Ethiopia's Christian tradition is not historical residue, but a force breathing life into present generations. This yearly ceremony knits Ethiopia's regions together, urban and rural, young and old, gather under a single chorus, a single gesture of faith. Timcat teaches that faith is not static, it's refreshed, washed clean each year. In this communal baptism, Ethiopians remember that the covenantal ark they guard is not an artifact locked away, but a living current that flows through their souls, carrying them closer to God's enduring promise. Ethiopia's spiritual legacy reaches beyond its borders, influencing movements like Rastafarianism, rooted in a belief that Haile Selassie descended from Solomon. Rastafarians consider Ethiopia their spiritual homeland, a Zion to which they aspire to return. Though Selassie himself remained an Orthodox Christian, the Rastafari faith reshaped his image into a divine figure. In Jamaica's lush hills, reggae tunes carry messages that celebrate Ethiopia as a land of liberation. Bob Marley's songs invoke Zion as more than a geographical place, but as a state of freedom and spiritual awakening. Ethiopia, thus, appears in global consciousness not as a distant African state, but as a beacon of prophecy and redemption. Rastafarians adopted Ethiopian flags, symbols, and languages they learned about Menelik, the Arkansas, and the Queen of Sheba, incorporating these narratives into their theology. While some Ethiopians find Rastafarian beliefs puzzling, others embrace the cultural exchange, seeing it as proof that Ethiopia's spiritual inheritance inspires distant hearts. Through the Rastafarian movement, Ethiopia's Christian narrative gained new dimensions. It stands as a reminder that sacred stories can travel across oceans and centuries, merging with new identities to produce fresh religious expressions. Just as Ethiopia absorbed biblical faith and made it its own, Rastafarians adapted Ethiopian symbols to their struggle against oppression. In a world fractured by race and inequality, Rastafarianism found in Ethiopia a symbol of Black pride and spiritual resilience. Ethiopia's ancient Christian lineage became a cornerstone for those seeking dignity and connection to a greater legacy. This unexpected global resonance shows that Ethiopia's story transcends geography. Its faith-filled roots, nurtured for millennia, can provide hope and meaning for people far removed from the highlands and valleys where it all began. Legends of the Ark remain central to Ethiopia's mystique. Stories tell that it rests in a small chapel in Aksum, guarded by a chosen monk who never leaves its side. According to lore, the Ark's holiness extends beyond the artifact itself. Its presence sanctifies the land, ensuring Ethiopia's spiritual shield. Pilgrims approach the chapel with reverence. They may never see the Arkansas, but they feel its aura. The surrounding community takes pride in their role as protectors. Generations pass. Monks come and go. Yet the Ark's sanctuary remains constant, a silent heartbeat of Ethiopian faith. These legends shape Ethiopia's identity. While modern archaeological debates rage elsewhere, Ethiopia clings to faith's ancient memory. The Ark's guardianship embodies trust in the unseen. Ethiopians learn from childhood that not all truth must be proven. Some truths are born by tradition and sealed by devotion. This trust resonates in other aspects of Ethiopian faith life. Icons, fasting cycles, and religious dances are accepted as vital expressions of Christianity's mystery. The Ark's hush encourages humility, inviting believers to honor what they cannot fully comprehend. The world often demands proof and tangible evidence, but Ethiopia's spiritual DNA values reverence over analysis. The Ark's inaccessibility may frustrate historians, but it fosters a sense of holy wonder among the faithful. It reminds them that their lineage, claiming direct ties to the Jewish patriarchs and Israelite kings, lives on in their blood and liturgies. In a modern age inclined to doubt, the Ark's legend stands as a monument to enduring faith. Ethiopia's guardians whisper through centuries that divine legacy needs no spotlight. It resides in hidden corners, in human hearts, and in the hush behind closed chapel doors. Within that silence, a nation's trust endures, honoring an eternal covenant. Ethiopia's monastic traditions stretch into remote landscapes. Some monasteries nestle atop vertical cliffs, reachable only by rope and sheer courage. Others hide deep in forests, surrounded by wildlife. Within these sanctuaries, monks and nuns devote their lives to prayer, study, and humble labor. They preserve ancient theological commentaries, liturgical music, and even medicinal knowledge. In these isolated enclaves, silence speaks volumes. The monks rise before dawn, chanting psalms that echo through empty canyons. They farm small patches of land, eat sparingly, and dedicate their minds to contemplating Scripture's depths. Hidden among their libraries are manuscripts unseen for centuries. Some contain rare interpretations of biblical passages, early missionary accounts, or apocryphal legends unique to Ethiopian tradition. Scholars who climb these heights find windows into Christianity's early soul, discovering variant readings and ancient theological debates long forgotten. Monastics see themselves as protectors of spiritual heritage. They recall how Ethiopia sheltered faith from external assaults, be it paganism, Islam, colonialism, or communist repression. In their quiet discipline, they embody Ethiopia's tenacity. While the world rushes, they slow down to discern God's voice in the rustle of leaves. Their example challenges modern assumptions. Does true progress mean abandoning old ways? These monasteries say no. They insist that the divine can be encountered in quiet simplicity, beyond mass media and endless distractions. Their existence ensures that Ethiopia's Christian identity remains multidimensional, comprising bustling cities and hidden hermitages alike. By safeguarding the past, these monastics enrich Ethiopia's present and future. They carry forward a tradition that predates printing presses and internet forums, offering a different path, one of inward exploration and reverence. In these secluded halls of prayer, Ethiopia's ancient covenant continues to glow, undimmed by centuries and untouched by worldly clamor. As centuries roll on, Ethiopia's role in biblical prophecy remains a subject of curiosity. Scholars revisit verses mentioning Cush or Ethiopia in contexts of future struggles or divine alliances. Ezekiel's and Zephaniah's prophecies continue to fascinate. Some envision Ethiopia aligning with nations in end-time scenarios. Others interpret these references symbolically, suggesting Ethiopia stands for Africa's spiritual heritage. In today's Ethiopia, people engage these ideas with thoughtful restraint. The Orthodox Church focuses more on spiritual preparation than geopolitical speculation. Monks and priests teach that all nations belong to God's plan. Instead of trying to decode dates and alliances, Ethiopians focus on faithfulness, fasting, prayer, caring for the poor, and preserving sacred traditions. Yet, these prophecies intrigue the faithful. Stories whisper that the Ark's presence ensures Ethiopia's special role. Just as the Ark guided Israel, maybe Ethiopia will guide others in chaotic times. Perhaps Ethiopia's unbroken Christian line stands ready to offer wisdom when global faith falters. Modern believers don't claim to know God's timetable. They accept prophecy as a mystery meant to deepen humility, not arrogance. After all, Ethiopia's greatness always came tempered by patience and trust. The people have learned to bear their lineage lightly, avoiding pride and welcoming grace. If final days do come, Ethiopia's spiritual storehouse, its liturgies, icons, and manuscripts remains open, a treasure for all who seek meaning. In this sense, prophecy is not just about grand cosmic battles, but about reminding the world that sacred legacies persist, even in lands overlooked by mainstream history. By preserving faith's flame, Ethiopia ensures that if the world ever needs a beacon in the darkness, it can find it in the highlands where prayer, prophecy, and humility entwine. Ethiopia's resilience and independence have made it a source of pride for Africans worldwide. Long before the decolonization wave swept the continent, Ethiopia stood as proof that Africans could rule themselves, maintain ancient traditions, and repel European ambitions. For many, Ethiopia's story offered a symbolic lifeline during colonial oppression. Pan-African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah admired Ethiopia's stand at Adwa, using it as inspiration to encourage African unity and self-determination. Ethiopia hosted the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, becoming a hub for diplomatic negotiations and continental collaboration. Its reputation as a land unbowed by colonial chains amplified its moral authority. Spiritual roots bolstered this influence. Ethiopia's Christian tradition, predating European missions, affirmed that Africa did not receive Christianity secondhand. It had its own apostolic memories and theological lineages. This helped dismantle racist narratives that Africa lacked spirituality or civilization. Today, Ethiopian flags wave in African festivals. Musicians sing of Ethiopia's feats, and scholars cite its history to remind the world that Africa's greatness is not confined to pyramids or distant Sahara kingdoms. Ethiopia symbolizes continuity, faith, and dignity. As new African nations forge their identities, Ethiopia's example offers a template. Embrace your heritage, defend your sovereignty, and integrate your spiritual legacy into national pride. This spirit resonates beyond borders and faiths, extending to anyone who struggles to preserve identity under external pressures. In the grand narrative of continents and faiths, Ethiopia stands as a testament that no people are too distant or too ancient to matter. Its journey from pre-flood genealogies to modern African leadership proves that divine legacy, righteous kingship, and prophetic destiny can inspire nations to walk proudly through history's storms, carrying a torch of hope and resilience. In Ethiopia's current religious landscape, Orthodox Christians remain the majority, but Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims also form significant communities. Interreligious dialogue is key in a nation cherishing its Christian heritage yet embracing pluralism. Churches, mosques, and chapels share city skylines, and festive processions occasionally pass side by side. Contemporary Ethiopians negotiate religious differences through forums, community projects, and educational exchanges. Their long memory of faith encourages them to see diversity as opportunity rather than threat. Although tensions exist, Ethiopia's deep spiritual roots often encourage cooperation over conflict. This interfaith mosaic embodies a principle woven into Ethiopia's Christian identity: hospitality. Throughout history, Ethiopia sheltered refugees. Early Muslims fleeing persecution found safety in Christian Ethiopia centuries ago, forging a legacy of coexistence. Today, Ethiopians recall that gesture, seeing religious pluralism as a continuity of that ancient hospitality. The moral teachings of Christianity, love, compassion, and forgiveness, provide common ground. Religious leaders encourage communities to combat poverty, hunger, and disease together. In rural villages, neighbors help rebuild each other's homes after storms, regardless of creed. In urban centers, interfaith dialogues address prejudice and misunderstandings. Such unity resonates with Ethiopia's age-old conviction that it holds a sacred trust. The Ark's guardianship symbolizes not just Ethiopian identity, but universal values of reverence, stewardship, and moral duty. If Ethiopia can uphold these values while embracing pluralism, it sets an example for a world often riven by sectarian strife. In forging peace and understanding among faiths, Ethiopia again lives out its biblical legacy. Just as its kings once welcomed foreign merchants and its scribes recorded sacred texts, Ethiopia now welcomes diverse believers under one celestial canopy. By doing so, it ensures that its faith story remains inclusive, compassionate, and perpetually relevant to the human family. After thousands of years, after genealogies that linked it to Noah, after a queen's journey to Solomon, after the Ark's rumored voyage to its highlands, and after embracing Christianity ahead of empires, Ethiopia remains a sovereign witness to God's unfolding narrative. Its resilience through invasions and ideologies testifies that faith-rooted identity cannot be easily conquered. From hidden manuscripts to carved churches, from the eunuch's baptism to the echo of distant prophecies, Ethiopia's legacy weaves through scripture like a golden thread. Each generation inherits this tapestry and adds its own stitch. The stories, symbols, and mysteries that make Ethiopia unique did not fade even when challenged by modern tides. As the 21st century advances, Ethiopia stands as a land where past and present, faith and culture, tradition and renewal coexist in dynamic harmony. It offers the world an ancient Christian perspective that transcends boundaries of race, nation, and era. A traveler in Addis Ababa might hear modern African pop and, minutes later, step into a church where chants from the early centuries still rise. Ethiopia's future remains unwritten, but guided by its past. It moves forward with a quiet assurance. It has seen empires crumble and ideologies fail, yet it persists, anchored by an invisible arc and ancient promises. Whatever tomorrow brings, Ethiopia believes God's purpose endures. It has no need to shout. Its existence speaks enough. As the world continues to spin, Ethiopia's story endures, an ongoing testament to faith's power to shape nations, to withstand adversities, and to anchor identity through millennia. For all who seek a living legacy of biblical faith, Ethiopia stands as a luminous, unbreakable strand in the grand tapestry of God's eternal design. And there you have it, the story of a land whose legacy spans millennia, connecting ancient prophecy with modern identity. What part of Ethiopia's story surprised you the most? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video, share it with a friend who loves history, and hit that subscribe button. Join us next time as we uncover more untold stories of the ancient world.